We wanted to talk about empire. I want to talk about that a little bit, and then maybe we move to questions. The title of the presentation today, The Empire Reborn. You frequently come back to this theme in the book of the PRC effort to reconstitute empire, rebuild empire. We're all familiar with the notion of rebirth or rejuvenation. Fuxing is a term that's been used a lot, even before Xi Jinping came to power. But of course, no one talks about the restoration or the rejuvenation of the great Chinese empire.
Yeah.
That's not a term that most people think positively of
right.
today.
And in fact, as we know, the party likes to use the term empire as a counterpoint to China's projects.
Right, exactly. So
victims of empire.
Right. So my question for you is, in your title and in your thinking about this, is your use of empire, are we to understand this in a figurative sense, or are we to understand it in a more literal sense?
I think somewhere in between, I would say. And I don't have a strict political science definition of empire. That's not what I'm working with here. I know that, some scholars...
This is not a gotcha moment, don't worry.
I know some scholars like to debate, what exactly defines an empire. And in my mind, having covered, many international events and covering U.S. foreign policy now, it becomes evident, I think, when a modern nation state takes the form of an empire. And I argue, in the prologue that the U.S. is an empire, and that part of my perspective is based on the fact that I reported in Iraq from 2003, 2007, and essentially saw, the most coercive workings of empire, the American empire in that form when I was reporting on that. And people have written about how the U.S. maintains its imperial reach with its many military bases around the world, its command of the dollar as a reserve currency in the world, and the use of sanctions that allows the U.S. to impose on the country. So there are different forms that empires can take, I think, in this area of republics and modern nation states. And I think that the Communist Party, their project, is a combination of that in some ways, like they, in a very material way. Like they have reconstituted the type of vast land or sea empire that ruled the world between the 17th and 19th centuries, like the type of empire that the Ottomans had, or that the Russians had, or that the British had, or that the French had. The communists succeeded in reconstituting most of the territory of that type of empire. And as my father experienced and was part of, had to use coercive means in order to maintain control over parts of that at different points of communist rule. So my father is part of what was very clearly a military occupation, like reconquest and occupation of Xinjiang, and then another part of the PLA went into Tibet, and taking over that large swath of what's today Western China, what back then in that era was either independent, de facto independent, or quasi-independent areas, was very much a part of bringing this vast land empire back under the control of a central authority. And at the same time, I think that today the party is trying to adopt the American form of empire as well, where it wants to displace America from its dominance in the series of institutions that it's built up after World War II, and wants to be the more dominant player in international institutions and set up its own military bases around the world to project power. I don't think that that's as important an objective as maintaining military superiority as well as internal control in the areas of Asia.